Welcome to Stories from the River, a show in which we go behind the scenes at Broad River Retail.
So your writing season you just completed was not this book. It's a different book that's going to come out next year. Is that correct? That you're now editing?
Yes, except because of the timing, I was able to get one little breather this year. 23 books in 16 years is a lot.
It's a lot.
It's
a lot.
I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, which
Okay.
means I'm always thinking about the next project, the next goal. And so I'm actually trying to slow my pace with a little bit of encouragement from my wife, of all people.
Really?
Kind of trying to slow that pace a little bit and probably get into about a every 18-month rhythm with books coming out.
Okay. I've heard about the 18-month rhythm. And is that how you're trying to solve the tension between, I wanted to ask you about, I mentioned the quote earlier, our potential is God's gift to us. What we do with our potential is our gift back to God, which can create, maybe if you take it to the extreme, an unhealthy tension, like I'm not doing enough, I need to be doing more. And do you struggle with that at all? And is that where like, hey, I need to like just kind of keep it balanced? Because do you understand kind of where I'm going with that?
Yeah. I think that's a huge tension point for me. So what I've had to do, Charlie, is get really good at boundaries. So I only do 7 overnight speaking trips per year. There was a point where I was doing 30 to 40. And then my wife said, this isn't what I signed up for. And I had to reprioritize and step back. And I would challenge people who are listening to this to do what I'm about to share. One, I had to define success. And so to me, success doesn't have anything to do with pastoring or writing. Success is when those who know me best respect me most. And that's my wife and my kids. So at the end of the day, I want to be famous in my home. And it's hard to be famous in your home if you're never home.
Right.
So I went through, just kind of from some mistakes made, redefining success, dialing a few other things back, and then making sure that my family got the best part of me. But that's always it's always a balancing act. I don't think you ever arrive at this moment of perfect equilibrium between work and family. But for me, I've had to put certain boundaries in place to try to prioritize what's really important.
Well, I love the way that you set that up. I mean, I think type A high achievers who also feel a call in their life are going to have that tension. I mean, I remember, if you look at some of the documentaries of Billy Graham and his family, like he was traveling all the time, right? He was, never home. And you wonder, like, what was it was great for humanity and the kingdom building and what he did, but there's a sacrifice there that those closest to him and who still loved him, but still had to pay to some extent. So I appreciate that. But I have a boundary that, in my role, I can go on a lot of different trips, and hey, there's Vegas market, and hey, do you want to stay this, that? And early on when the kids were young, I said, I'm not going to be away from home more than 100 hours at a time. Like that's it. And really since COVID, it's like you, I say, I've gotten really good at saying no to a lot of travel, to a lot of trips, because I just don't want to miss the moments and the time that we have. But I did want to come make this trip. This trip was important. This trip was important.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah, this is there's so many quotes that you come up with, and I know you talked about like reverse engineering through all the books that you read, and that you're stewing on ideas maybe before your writing season starts. I'd love to maybe tease that out a little bit more of like, when does the idea kind of get nested in your brain, and how do these quotes come about? And you talked about day tight compartments and decades happen. What's the one, decades and days? And I'm not going to have them all memorized. But
I mean, there are decades when nothing happens, and there are days when decades.
That's it.
Yeah.
Can you say that once more?
Yeah. There are decades when nothing happens. There are days when decades happen.
How'd that come to you?
Well, I mean, that's what's funny is that particular quote, there's some, they're like, you go online and everything's debatable, right? That one, I'm trying to remember the origin of that. I kind of took it and tweaked it a little bit. But since we're on the subject, Charlie, can I just, a little challenge? I think every leader ought to have like 5 quotes in their back pocket that are just their go-to. So never lose a holy curiosity would be one of them for me. Oswald Chambers said, let God be as original with others as he was with you, which is huge. A.W. Tozer has a few of them. He said a low view of God is the cause of 100 lesser evils. A high view of God is the solution to 10,000 temporal problems. I think about a guy named R.T. Kendall. Said sometimes the greatest opposition to what God wants to do next comes from those who are on the cutting edge of what God did last. And so I think just there are things that I read that, I can't afford to forget that. And that quote almost becomes part of the way that I'm wired.
Yeah. I love that. So every leader's going to have 5 quotes that they're just in their back pocket. That's good.
I think so.
It's a great challenge.
I think just things that really impacted you.
In your books, so you mentioned a few, Tozer and Eugene Peterson. Who are some of the writers who've been most influential and impactful in your life?
Yeah. Tozer's right up there. His stuff is timeless. I like writers who cross-pollinize, take ideas from here and there,
parallel
and
thinking,
juxtapose them, and because as a communicator, my goal is to say old things in new ways. I want to turn the kaleidoscope a little bit and help people think or hear or see in a way that's just a little different. But you know Bob Goff?
Yes.
Bob is hilarious.
I saw that he signed your wall over here.
He did sign the wall.
Yeah.
Love does everybody.
Yeah.
I love the books. Bob's crazy, and that's the highest compliment he would love to hear. I like the way Bob says it. He says, when he approaches scripture, he says, I exegete the text, then I turn my head slightly to the left, and I try to look at, so how I communicate. I think it might have been Emily Dickinson who said, tell it slant. In other words, say it just a slightly different way. I've got a mentor, spiritual father, a guy named Dick Foth, 80 years old, who's so good at this. Why would you call a year when you could call it what it really is, a trip around the sun? That's a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
And on that note, even on a day you didn't get much done, you are on a planet that's speeding 67,000 miles per hour through space. So you didn't get much done, but you did travel 1.6 million miles today. So there's that. That's what I'm talking about. I like reading things that make me think different. So Malcolm Gladwell would be so good at this. Guy named Adam Grant, another great. His book called Originals. Anything that just make me think different, make me see it different.
Take an idea and explain it. And those two are contemporaries, by the way. I've seen listen to podcasts where they go out. So, do you listen to podcasts?
I do.
Do you have some favorites, like in your feed?
You know what? Carey Nieuwhof is a friend, and so his podcast. He's getting people that I love hearing their story. It is, so on a long drive, I'll listen to one of his. I like a Radio Lab or a Freakonomics, or it's the same thing. Something that's just, tell me something I never thought about. What's your short list of kind of go-to podcasts?
Joshua was asking me this. So I like Craig Rochelle's leadership podcast. And he's become a great communicator. And I'll do the Maxwell Leadership Podcast. You were talking about Maxwell earlier. I like Prof G.
Okay.
He's got, I like, I asked someone one time who's with Ashley Furniture what he listens to, and it was We Study Billionaires. So I like that one. I don't always understand what they're talking about,
yes.
but I like kind of listening to that. So those would be a few. Like,
and How I Built This.
How I Built This, Guy Raz is great. Although I don't listen to it as often all the time, but there's also Views from the Top that he does, another one. David Novak, How Leaders Lead. He was the head of Yum Brands. Simon Sinek's got one. Greg McCune's got one that's really good. And so those would be a few. I'd have to pull up my phone and get some of those.
I mean, how crazy is this? We're talking about all of these incredible podcasts, and of course, we're podcasting right now.
That's right.
I mean, we live in a totally different world than we did 10 or 15 years ago. And to me, the challenge almost is more, it's certainly not access to information, because we've got it at our fingertips. I think it's information overload, and you have to be really good at picking your sources.
Yeah.
One concern, this is riffing a little bit, but one concern with social media is, I don't know if we were designed to know everything about everything all the time in real time. And so it feels like it can be a little overwhelming, almost like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Like, man, we're eating a lot of fruit off of that tree. So there is a measured concern. I mean, what is it now? Information is doubling maybe every 12 hours? I mean, give or take.
Well, on podcasting and information, that can create anxiety, because how do you keep up with your feed? On social media, and this is my opinion, but I think of it as like inputs, and inputs I think correlate to like diet. Okay, so I've really kind of studied some of these guys and what they're doing for their diets, and trying to learn more about maybe the Mediterranean diet or the plant-based diet, and considering moving more in those directions. But it's like, with social media and the algorithms, like, do I want to give them control over my diet and doom scrolling, that sort of thing? So I want to be very, so you talked about boundaries. I want to make sure I have really good boundaries of what I let in, because I do think it could be the next tobacco. We don't know what it's doing to our bodies, right? And so, so that does concern me, and limiting screen time, limiting that sort of thing, and the studies that come out, like what the impact will be with there's some, and I want to ask you about some of that. But it's a different world. We have to think about all that. Well, it's rewiring our brains.
You know what's funny, Charlie, is people who are younger can hardly believe that there was a time that I was reading 200, 250 books a year. But I have to remind them, I didn't have a cell phone, and I wasn't spending 2 hours and 22 minutes on social media, which is the average. So if you take back 2 hours and 22 minutes, you can read a lot of books with that kind of margin. Right. So I think it is about being proactive, getting the right inputs, and I love it for exercise, because when you're running, when you're biking, to be able to input your brain with some of that podcast material, I think is a win-win.
100%. Except for the running. Running, I need music. Biking or Peloton, I'm doing audiobooks like yours.
What's your soundtrack? What's your, if you really need to get motivated, do you have a?
I'll customize a soundtrack, and it's a wide, varied list of songs.
I mean, I'm a Rocky IV sound.
I love some.
There you go.
So I've not done a marathon like you've done, but I have done a few half marathons. I've got to do another one this Saturday.
I love it. Come on.
Thanks for listening to Stories from the River. To check out more episodes, visit storiesfromtheriver.com. Join us again next week, and remember to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast.